Well, thank you, Michael. This was fascinating and very exciting. And I have the opportunity, we don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, but I want to ask a few follow-up questions. And maybe the first one, coming back to your last couple of slides about Canada. So if you could sum up, you listed a bunch of opportunities and resources and skills that Canada has to offer. So what do we need to do now? What do Canadian governments need to do now to seize these opportunities and to build on some of the competitive advantages that we have in this space? You also showed Quebec's extremely low industrial electricity price earlier. So if you could kind of give your top 3 recommendations on concrete actions that Canadian governments should be working on right now to seize these opportunities.
Okay, so let me start by saying, well, first of all, I'm sorry I went a bit long, but it was because there was so many good conversations with people over the last few days, and they're sort of begging me to make sure I included all these different issues. So I'm sorry, Rick, I apologize, I did that. I said that Canada's got a lot of cards. Let me preface my response, because it's important, is that Canada also has one really dud card, right? There's one thing that makes this really, really hard, and that is, I mean, in some ways it's a blessing as well, but it is really low gas prices. And so it's very difficult, because an easy answer would be, well, you know, forge ahead at home and then the export opportunities will come. Well, yeah, but it's hard when forging ahead in something like domestic heating means pushing people's bills up, which it could do because gas is so cheap. But I would say, first part of the answer is forge ahead at home, but pragmatic climate reset, do it in the areas that are either, if you triage the opportunities, there's a whole bunch of stuff that just is cheaper and better already. So do that without a question. A lot of that will be things around clean electricity and also transportation, where it's just cheaper and better to go electric. And by the way, finance plays a role, because it's cheaper and better if finance is cheap. And if finance is expensive, it might not be. So fix a few things, do that stuff. There's a whole bunch of things that the economics make sense, but but the markets can't do it. Maybe there's, let's say, landlords are not going to improve homes because they can't charge more rent. And so there's a lot of hard regulatory work. So I'm going to get this out of the way. It's sort of annoying me. I feel like the little shop of horrors. I've got Audrey here. Audrey 2, I think. There we go. That's better. So there's a bunch of stuff. The economics is good, but there needs a lot of work on regulation and also, you know, entrepreneurship and finance and so on. And then there's some stuff that is just really hard. If it involves consumers, I would simply avoid it at this point. I would not be, with this current political environment, I would not be loading costs on, I would not be banning furnaces or banning anything or making people's lives difficult or more expensive. I would do a little bit of that with in industry. So keep the carbon price. Don't go crazy. You don't need huge carbon prices. There's a lot that will fall at industrial heat pumps and so on that don't need high carbon prices. So I would forge ahead at home within limits. And then I think in terms of, you know, exports and the you know, international, I think I would definitely be sending my diplomats to places like Malaysia, huge automotive supply chain, Mexico, huge automotive supply chain. So come on, what can we do together, right? We're in, you know, we've got some things we're good at. We've got something we might not be able to make batteries in Canada, but we can certainly do a lot of the precursors. And could we assemble and so on? There's a lot, or you know, Eastern Europe that's got a lot of the manufacturing. So there's a lot of things, a lot of sort of redirecting of the trade flows, which one could do. And that would be number 2. And I'll think of number 3 if you give me time.
Okay, great. Well, let's stay on that kind of multilateral aspect a little bit. So we also showed the US. We've seen some retreat on clean energy and decarbonization recently. So what does multilateralism around these issues look like in the absence of the US? What are challenges? What are opportunities for Canada? You just outlined maybe stronger relationships with most of the world. Could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, so I mean, look, in a sense, the lucky thing is that the US has stepped away from UNFCCC. So now you can go to a COP meeting and just talk to, you know, it's not that everybody is like-minded, because there's still, you know, some of the usual suspects that didn't want climate action. But that I think, in a funny way, that has become a more productive environment. it's clearly not going to be, it was never binding and all those things, but there's some good conversations that can be had there. In the Pragmatic Climate Reset, I wrote some recommendations like hold the COP meetings on islands with no more than 5,000 beds, and stuff like that, just to make it more manageable and cut it from 2 weeks to 1 week. It's insane. It becomes this absurd sort of Woodstock festival and so on. And Catherine's sort of smiling ruefully there because it's eaten so much of her life. But there's a lot of things one could do and focus the conversations. I actually think we should get rid of all the forestry stuff and all of that. It's just, countries are not going to decide their land use based on what some, colloquium of climate, ministers is going to do. And so there's lots of things one could do to improve that. Also, interestingly, I think that the trade conversation is really fascinating. So I was on the UK Board of Trade, and, it would be nice to say, well, we'll all glom onto the WTO. And I mean, if the US would leave the WTO would probably become, in a funny way, also more useful. I don't know that you can build a parallel WTO, but certainly the trend in trade anyway has been towards a lot of bilateral and regional, so Mercosur or TPCPP, or obviously the EU if that's your thing, and so on. I think there's a lot more that can be done. And also, by the way, trade deals. I tried to get. There's a long story about. I had this idea about a free trade area for sustainable goods and services. I call it SEFTA, Sustainable Energy Free Trade Area, at the time when NAFTA was still a thing. Before it got nuked, and it is possible to do quite major trade deals around these sorts of solutions and services and products. So maybe there is and there are nascent organizations. New Zealand is amazing at this stuff. I would go and visit New Zealand and see, they've got a little thing with like Fiji and a few other countries. The environmental trade agreement, which we tried to get through, failed actually when President Trump was elected the first time. So I think there's a certain amount of formalization around the international multilateral trade space that can probably be done. But trade is really formalizing trade, multilateral trade agreements that, Doha took 20 years and failed, so it's not quick. Bilateral is a lot faster.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, maybe talking about inertia and factors that could slow the great acceleration down that you've presented to us is happening, mostly driven by technological change and pure economics. But of course, energy systems and decision-making about energy and regulation and policy is a lot more than technology and economics. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more. What are kind of institutional changes that we need to see? Again, you mentioned even the way we account for energy and energy use is not quite suited to that system that we're moving into, to the energy world that is emerging around us. Could you elaborate on a couple of other kind of real institutional changes, cultures, norms, rules that need to change to make sure that we're not bogging down this acceleration that we're seeing right now? So
I'm actually going to, if I might, I'm going to try and level up that question.
Go for it.
Because one thing we've got to deal with is, what is our target now, right? So we've had this decade of 1.5, and I think it was good to do that, right? I was always skeptical, not skeptical, it could not be achieved. In 2018, the moment that the UNFCCC came out with this report on 1.5, in 2015, by the way, there's a fantastic series of podcast interviews with people who were negotiating in 2015, so not just Catherine, but also Christiana Figueres and Laurence Toubiana, the French climate envoy, and Todd Stern. 1.5 degrees came a little bit out of, I want to say out of nowhere, but there was no analytical basis for it at the time. That was then backfilled in 2018, and I immediately was out there saying, can't be done. Try, great to have an aspirational goal, but it can't be done. And the world, decided to glom onto it and try anyway. It was a good thing to do because we examined every single ton of emissions from every industry in every country. But we are where we are, and there's a question about what should the target be. And some people, I was at a lecture by Adair Turner, who's the chair of the Energy Transitions Commission, and he was talking about, 2 degrees is still achievable, and it is, right? But do you want to go from the 1.5 decade to the 2 degrees decade? What is the target we should adopt? And I think it comes back to that little 4-line model that I showed, right? The targets at least a big chunk of the target should be grow the clean stuff. really fast, whatever that takes. And if we can just grow it 3% per year faster than demand, then by 2065, 2 degrees compatible pretty much, we will have transitioned. So then the question is, if you buy that the goal is just grow clean stuff, then you can start to ask about institutions. What is an institution that can keep the growth going? What does a national lab do in a world where you're worrying, maybe you've got a lot of focus on what do we do this year, which is very much private sector oriented. You've got then maybe some shorter term, 3-year, 5-year, where there's a lot of, sort of governments twisting arms and squeezing heads and trying to get things aligned. Finance works very well on a 3, 5, 7-year time frame, private equity and so on. But then national labs would be maybe filling the hopper with new technologies and so on for the periods after. So you can start to see how a set of institutions could perhaps work together around this kind of keep the foot on the accelerator approach. I do think the reason I go big on the primary energy fallacy is because we need the data to, all of that primary energy demand stuff dated from the 1970s. All of our advanced economies had a near-death experience. Holy what's-its, where are we going to get energy? And it's a neo-colonial response to say, I've got this much, and I'm going to count it. That's my primary energy. Oh, you've got that much. You've got that much. But all energy, pretty much, was thermal. Other than hydro, it was all thermal. So it didn't matter. You were comparing like with like. Primary energy worked. The challenge today is not, how do we grab lots of lumps of coal? The challenge today is how do we keep these buildings warm without trashing the atmosphere, right? How do we enable aviation or shipping? Or the question is you've got to shift from the supply side, because you could nail the supply side and have all the gas and all the coal and all the oil that you want, and still have a totally unsuccessful a system that doesn't meet human needs. So we've got to focus on what are the needs, and then we work back. And I'm trying to get all these energy data providers to put a first chapter 0 or chapter 1 should not be primary energy. Oh, look, primary energy goes down, and then all of the people, oh, that's terrible, and you're impoverished. No, it goes down because we're fixing the system. That's chapter 14. Chapter 1 is what do humans need in terms of energy, and chapter 2 is how are you going to do it without, it's got to be affordable, and it's got to be resilient, and it's got to be clean in terms of pollution and clean in terms of emissions. And we should be starting every big energy report, national level, multilateral level, should actually start with that, and not with how many lumps of coal you happen to have got.
Thank you. I think we're out of time, but rapid fire, did you think of the third action that Canadian government should take right now?
Just electrification.
Right.
Electrification, and there's a lot of, and the narratives around it don't say we have to electrify to save the planet, right? Because whatever percent it is of Canadians, and a much larger percentage in Alberta, will say, I'm out, not interested. If you say, look, the future, look at direction, face the direction of travel, the world is going electric. Electric provides better solutions in industry, in homes, in vehicles. It is the future. We're going to provide better cars, better heating, solutions that don't give your kids asthma because they've got furnaces in your district and so on. So it's going to be better, it's inevitable, and Canada is going to do really well, and there's going to be lots of jobs and money. But it's electrification.
Thank you. That's a perfect last word. Thank you.